I invite you to join me today for a story that has the potential to change your life. It's a tragic, yet beautiful story. If you're struggling with loss, if you're struggling with forgiveness, if you're struggling with how to figure out how to live in the hard places that grief thrusts upon you, then today's story is for you, because you're going to walk away with courage, you're going to walk away in awe, and you're going to walk away with hope. Because this story is an example that God can do immeasurably more than anything we can ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. Join me today as my guests are Arlo and Capri Weiskopf. This is Teresa Davis, your host of the Grief Mentor podcast. Welcome to Season 2, where together we will journey through the hardships that grief thrusts upon us while holding on to the anchor that is trustworthy and true. Here you will find interviews and biblical truths that speak healing into the mind, body, and spirit of the brokenhearted. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're going to talk about child loss and all that brings into a family and a marriage. But this story today has an additional layer of grief for both mom and dad. We're going to share a story of love and forgiveness that provides an example for all of us of what life in Christ looks like. My guests today are Capri and Arlo Weiskopf. Arlo and Capri live in Northern Maryland, which I think is totally cool, guys, because Tony and I live here in the Midwest, and living in a coastal town sounds so neat. We have rivers and streams and lakes, and that's about it around here in the Midwest. But our paths cross with Arlo and Capri while we were awaiting facilitator retreat. And I fell in love with them, and their short story was so compelling. I wanted you guys to hear it. Arlo and Capri facilitate retreats in Maryland, and they have a monthly support group there as well. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about While You're Waiting. So if you guys are wondering what that is, it is a retreat for bereaved parents. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Arlo and Capri have 4 beautiful children. Arlo runs the family pet care business, and Capri takes care of the rest. They enjoy the outdoors, which I can only imagine why, where you guys live. They love to hike, fish, camp, surf, and many other activities. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Yes.
Yeah. Right before we started recording, they were telling me what they did for Valentine's last night, and it sounded so cool. Was out on the, near the water by themselves. Tony and I love the ocean, the beach, and all of that. So I know the temperatures run a little cooler in Maryland. Is that right?
Yeah. Not this year, but normally we've had a very, very mild winter. It's been a blessing for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool.
We love being close to the water, and it's just been awesome to be able to facilitate our retreats right here on the bay. We get to see sunsets on the water. It's just a gorgeous place, and for us, it's very restorative to be on the water and near the water. So it's very peaceful. And
definitely.
Yeah, I remember y'all telling stories about building fires on the beach with your retreat folks. So yeah, that sounds amazing. Well, let's dive right in, guys. I'd like for you guys to share your story and tell us about your precious Amos.
Love to.
Yeah. So I'll start off. November 9th, 2004, our sweet Amos was born. He was actually, out of all 4 children, the only child we actually planned for. And he was the only child that had brown eyes out of the rest of our children who all had blue eyes. He was really like a very stoic child from birth, like just very serious. And I think we say this all the time. We've heard this from a lot of parents, but he was like an old soul. And he was still a toddler. And he loved all the toddler things. He loved he loved tractors and trucks, and he loved his brother, and he loved to play ball. In fact, he carried around a ball in his hand all the time. And the boys would dress up. Eli would dress up Amos as Batman. He'd be Batman and Robin. And they just loved each other. And, the funny thing was, he was definitely a mama's boy, which just warms my heart so much.
Capri would volunteer weekly at a crisis pregnancy center. So, of course, Eli and I would watch Amos. And as soon as Mama left, he would go to the door and just plop down the door and just cry for Mama, cry. And we, of course, go over, console him, try to distract him, do anything. And he wouldn't know parts of it. Get down on the floor and go back to the door and cry for mama. And it was just something that he was pretty much did every week when mama went to the crisis pregnancy center. Even at church, you could always hear him in the background in the nursery crying and screaming.
From the auditorium, you could hear Amos back in the screaming for mommy.
I don't think you got to see a full service in most of his life just because he always wanted to be with mama.
Yeah.
That was precious in hindsight for sure, to be able to have that bond.
Definitely.
Precious. Yes, so, absolutely.
It was May 29th, 2006. It was the day after my 30th birthday. It was a beautiful, really warm end of May. It was May 29th. So it was big puffy clouds and sky blue skies. And I have a twin brother. And he called me up and said, hey, let's go out on the boat and celebrate our birthdays with our families. And it's like, that sounds like a great idea. We had a couple chores to get done. We had just planted our garden and we had to finish that and some other odds and ends and running errands. So now all of a sudden we had a little bit more to put on our plate because.
Yeah. And for him, I had 2 toddlers that, I was trying to take care of that day. And of course, the amount of chores we needed to get done before we went and had fun. So I basically was like, okay, well, let's swap up the boys because Arlo was doing other things. And I took them to the store with me and came back home and realized, it's nap time. I got to go down for a nap and put them down, went out and did a few things around the house. And, that day I definitely was like, just felt a lot of attack, from the enemy. I just was having kind of an off day, but I was ready to go have some fun and felt a little overwhelmed. But I let them sleep for a bit, went back in and woke them up. And it was just a really hot day. And I thought, let's have some popsicles. So I got the popsicles out and I normally would just give them popsicles and do something in the house, but I felt like I'm going to sit down and just relax. And I sat down and I watched Amos eat his popsicle, and I remember it was a red one. And then I just thought, okay, guys, it's time to go outside and we're going to get some chores done. And as we're walking outside, the tractor's sitting there in the driveway. And of course, we had to stop and get on the tractor. And I said, okay, we got to get down the garden. We need to go finish planting a few plants and just water it. And they off the tractor, Eli ran down to the play set that was down next to the garden. And as I'm walking down, I turn around, I see Amos, he's standing on the side of the hill, and there's a pasture out in front of the house. And he looks so mesmerized. And I thought, what's he looking at? And I looked out in the pasture and I didn't see any of the cows or the horse out there. And I thought, what is going on? But he looked so sweet and beautiful. And in hindsight now, I think, gosh, I wonder if he was seeing Jesus because of the fact that I'd never seen his little face, that just the way he looked. So we just continued on. You're outside and you're doing what you're doing. And the kids, you can hear them. They're playing on the swing set. And Arlo, I asked him, hey, look, we need some more hose, for the garden because I couldn't reach all the way at the end. So
we live on a small farm, and my parents live on the bottom of it. And down there we have sheds and we have extra hoses and whatnot. So I took the car down, and the way our property is situated up by our house is our driveway runs right next to our garden. And then just off past that, there's a little swing set, and then our house sits up on top of the hill and the driveway continues up there. So I went down and grabbed some hoses, put them in the back of the car, brought them on up and pulled off just right there by the garden on the driveway. And we went ahead and, watered the garden. And at that point, it was time to get ready to clean up. And
I thought, oh my goodness, I need to just go wash up and get ready. So I ventured on up to the house, and, we're all in the area. So we kind of just have a sense. And I just told him I was going up to the house, and he sees me walk up.
Yeah, so I finished putting the hose in the back of the car, and I'm going to take them up to the house. And I hop in the car and look up, and I saw Capri walk up the hill, and I saw Elijah with her, and I thought I saw Amos. So get in the car to go ahead and pull the car up, and I feel a bump. And there shouldn't be a bump there. There's no pothole in our driveway. There's nothing to cause that. So I get out, and I go to the front of the car, and I look down, and there's my baby boy. Mm-hmm. So I just scoop him up, and I run up to the house just screaming, call 911, call 911. And the way our house is set up, we have a back door that we use 99% of the time, and a front door we use 1% of the time. And so, but the front door looks down over the driveway and the garden where the car was. And so I'm running up to the back door screaming, call 911, call 911. And
as he's screaming and I hear him, I'm on the phone with the dispatcher, and I'm near the front door. And she's going, what is going on? And I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea. And I go out the front door, run down the hill, and I don't see anything. I see the car, but I don't see anything. And she's continuing to ask me what is happening. And I have no answers for her until I turned around and I could see Arlo coming down the hill carrying Amos lifeless. And I just kind of knew, I just kind of knew my mama heart was telling me this is something is not right. And I started to go into shock. I could not talk. I couldn't do anything. I literally remember looking at Arlo, trying to resuscitate Amos, and I heard cardiac arrest. And he looked up at me, and I just walked over to the garden. And
Well, you handed me the phone.
I'm sorry, I handed you the phone. And as you're talking, I heard him say cardiac arrest. And I stumbled over to the garden and just started crying out to the Lord, like, oh God, please, help us, help us. And in that moment, the Lord spoke to my heart, I'm coming soon. That was just what I needed at that very moment, because I just kind of knew that Amos was gone. I just kind of knew, and the Lord really took those words of encouragement I needed to get going. I needed to do what we needed to do. If there was any sliver of hope that Amos could make it, I was going to do whatever I could. So he told me to go down and get Mom, because Eli's right there with us, and he's 4 at the time. We jump in the car, we run down and get Mom and bring her up, and she keeps Eli, and we just
we're about 5 miles from the nearest stoplight in the fire department. We're kind of out in the country a little bit, and we were on landline with 911, and we knew every second mattered. So it's like, we're getting out in the car, we're going to meet the ambulance. Mm-hmm. So I just hung up with 911, and we rolled in Capri. She drove like Mario and
I don't remember driving at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure my ministering angels around me driving for me. But as we're coming up the road, I see the officer coming, and I just pulled the car right off on the side of the road and, hopped out and waved them down. And the ambulance was right there behind them.
So they both did U-turns and pulled over on the shoulder right there. And I jump out of the car and run up to the ambulance, and they had the doors wide open. I handed Amos to me. They slammed the door shut. And then I just kind of stumbled off to the side of the road. There was a little bit of a knoll there. I stumbled, and that's when it hit me. I mean, up until that point, it was just work, work, work. Do what you can to save them. Do everything you can. I was just so focused on that nothing else was even thought about. And that's when the weight of it hit me.
Yeah.
What just happened? What did I just kill my son? What's going to happen with my wife, my marriage, my life? Everything just crashed to a halt, and I'm just sitting on the side. It's just, the reality is just sinking in. Oh my God, what just happened?
And as they had closed the doors, I had kind of sat on this knoll and was just sitting there praying. And the Lord spoke to my heart again, get up, go tell your husband you forgive him. Because, and I knew, that Arlo loves our kids. I knew this was an accident, and I just wanted him to feel safe and tell him it was going to be okay. So I just walked over and wrapped my arms around him, and I said, I forgive you.
In that moment, when she came to me and just forgave me, it gave me this sense of peace, but it was also just, okay, she's going to have my back in this. And it was kind of okay, what are we doing here right now? Mm-hmm. The ambulance had left. We're sitting on the side of the road. It's we need to be at the hospital right now. We need to be with our baby. We need to get there. Yeah. And there was a young male deputy there and an older sergeant who was there, or maybe lieutenant. And I was we need to get to the hospital. Yeah. And the sergeant's well, you can't go. We need you to go back to the accident site. And your wife will waiting. We have a female deputy en route. She should be here real shortly to go ahead and take your wife to the hospital.
And I just was that's not important. Let's just get in the car and go. It doesn't matter who takes me. So they said, okay. We got in the car and we drove the fastest I've ever driven. And I just remember I'd still not cried yet. I was still in such shock. But I remember saying to the officer, do you have children? And he said, yes. And I was just go home and love on them, tonight. And, we proceeded on, and I was just praying. I was just praying out loud, and I don't remember anything I said, but I remember getting to the hospital, and I was barefooted walking down the hall to the room And there was a counselor waiting for me. And I just, I just knew, but I just was, again, holding on to slivers of hope. But I just said, "Are you a Christian?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Let's pray." And we just prayed. And moments after that, a doctor came in and said, "I'm so sorry. We've done everything we possibly could for your son." And I just remember wrapping my arms around her, and the floodgates opened, and I just bawled. I just bawled. And just after that, my parents came in, and to say the words I said to them, Amos is with Jesus, was our new reality at that very moment. And boy, Arlo hasn't even gotten there yet, so I haven't even talked to him. But
well, meanwhile, like Capri left with the deputy to go to the hospital, and they brought me back to the house. When I get back to the house, my twin brother was here. There was this young deputy. I mean, he was just visibly shaken, ashen face. He was just chain smoking cigarettes, and he was visibly uncomfortable. And my brother told me he was there for suicide watch. And I just felt the Holy Spirit come on me. I mean, I'm still covered in blood. I look horrible. But I walked up to him and I said, "I'm not going to hurt myself." I said, "But I know I don't have the answers to why this happened this way, but I know God has a greater purpose in this. He's got a great purpose in this." And I remember asking if I could change, and the young deputy said, "No, you're not allowed to go in and change. I just need to be, at the hospital." And so my brother actually talked to the sergeant or lieutenant, whoever it was, and he gave me permission to go change. And come out, I was like, "So what are we waiting for? I need to be with my wife and my child." And like, "We're waiting for the detectives to come. They should be here shortly." And the sergeant or lieutenant, he could just see. He's like, "You know what? Just show me where the accident happened." And I did. And he said, "I'll take you to the hospital." So we get in the car, and we were driving maybe the speed limit. It didn't feel like it. It felt very slow. And that's when I knew there's no reason to race there. He's already gone. And it was the longest ride of my life. And we get to the hospital, and that's when Capri met me there.
Yeah. I just remember coming down the hallway, and I kind of felt like I just couldn't really walk. I remember my dad was kind of propping me up as we're coming down the hallway, but I see Arlo, and I just remember walking straight to him and just wrapping my arms around him and telling him that our little boy was in heaven with the Lord. And, there were so many people that had arrived there, in the waiting room with us. We had some of my siblings, pastors, and
assistant pastors,
friends, and so many people coming around us at that very holy moment to just embrace us.
I remember just being in that room holding Amos, and just the Holy Spirit just speaking through me and speaking to these pastors. There was quite a few pastors in there, and lay people too, but it was just that this isn't going to be in vain, that God has something bigger for this. And, at the time you couldn't even process this is just happening. But, we had to leave the hospital, without Amos, of course.
Yeah. And that's hard. That was so hard.
I remember, that next week of just all that goes involved, it's like planning for a wedding, but you're planning for a memorial service, and all the entails that we all as bereaved parents know and gone through, how much that just, you got to go to the funeral home, you got to do this with the medicals, all the stuff that involved with that. And we had a beautiful memorial service. It was, overflowing in capacity. It was over 700 people there. It's like, how did this little boy, 18 months old, affect this many people? We got letters from all over the world, from Africa and China and Korea, all over the world, people sending us letters of encouragement. It's like, how did this little boy touch all these hearts around the world? And it was just one of those things, it was awesome to see what God was doing just in the early parts of our tragedy. And then we just, after all that memorial service, everything, we just had to get away. It was like, we need just to decompress and just get away for a little bit. And like we talked earlier, we love being on the water and we love the ocean. So we ran out to the Outer Banks and just to get away. God just blessed that whole trip. It was all spontaneous, but God's hands were all in it. And I just remember I was on the beach the next day. I remember him just speaking to me. He's like, "Wouldn't it be nice just to have a place where people could come with no other agenda, just to be fed and loved on, and just to be able to share the hope that we have, that we can all come alongside each other. He planted that seed, that desire in our heart back that first weekend after the memorial service. And then fast forward, we came back to life and our reality, but God still had that desire in our hearts to do that. And so Capri and I, mostly Capri, have been watching and looking to see what other kind of retreat centers there are. And this is even before While Waiting was even started.
We didn't even know what it looked like, because honestly, I mean, think about that verse that God gave you, about sharing the hope that we have with others, the comfort that he's given us, and it's 2 Corinthians 1:5. But actually, we felt that, my goodness, how could we comfort anybody? We're a mess. That didn't seem at that moment, that thought was kind of like, oh my goodness, Lord, you're going to have to really work on us, because, this didn't seem fathomable at that point. And he was working. He was really working now, and he was putting tools in our belts, and we didn't even know it half the time, but he was going before us.
Yeah. And that was one of those things that we had that desire, and I was like, okay, God, we're ready. He's like, no, you're not ready. And okay, I'm ready. He's like, no, you're not ready. And, in hindsight, I could see clearly that we weren't ready. But, it was one of those things that God had put that desire. We knew it was there. And we had been watching we watched While We're Waiting start. They're doing the ministry at the family farm. And these retreats, we saw Hope's Lodge start. And we just, okay, this is pretty neat, but we want to do our own thing, and how do we do that? And we felt God kind of released us. Okay, now's the time. And this was 2018. It was August of 2018. So Capri gets on to actually While We're Waiting site, and Arkansas is booked for a year, and Oregon had just started. So it was their second location, just started having retreats. And it was an opening in April of 2019. So we went ahead and we registered. Well, first of all, I love Oregon. It's one of my favorite states, such a beautiful place. And I'd never been to Arkansas before, but Capri had never been to the West Coast. So it was like, let's go to Oregon. So we signed up to go to Oregon, and then we get a call or email from Jill in November. I guess it was probably like the 4th or 5th of November. And she said, I know this is last minute. I know it's all the way across the country, but we have an opening this weekend at our retreat in Oregon. Would you like to attend? It was actually Amy's birthday. But we're there.
I want to kind of hold that thought a minute, because your story, guys, even though I've heard it, it was very hard to hear again. But there's a couple of things that I want to unpack, because you guys, you may not realize, but you're very unique. First of all, Capri, when in that moment, when you heard the Holy Spirit speak to your heart, you obeyed. You didn't hesitate. And what strikes me about your guys' story is the amount of faith. First, I want you to talk a little bit more about how you felt compelled to offer Arlo forgiveness, and how has that affected your grief journey?
The thing is, when we go through trials, it does affect, where our faith is. It reveals where our faith is. And that's the thing for me, is that at that very moment, I know that I've been forgiven much, and I know that this was an accident. And I just had this trust in the Lord, and I can't say that I did it right all the time, but I just knew that I wanted to just trust him in this circumstance. And I love Arlo, and I know that we've been through a lot, and it's just one of those things that I just wanted to be a safe place for him, if I'm going down the right road with you. I don't know if he wants to add in on that either, but
for one thing, this kind of grief with child loss, and we're going to talk about marriage in a little bit, but I honestly, first of all, your obedience was remarkable in that moment. I feel like you described the state that you were in. It was clear that you were in a state of shock, but yet you still heard the voice of the Holy Spirit. That's remarkable. And the fact that you acted on that and then took that weight off of Arlo completely. Well, maybe not completely. You can talk to us about that, Arlo, but just taking that out of the picture and allowing the Lord to use that. And speak to us, Arlo. How did that affect you? Her forgiveness, how did that affect you?
It was huge relief, first of all, just because, I was guilty as charged. I was the one who was the instrument used to kill Amos. So for her, I just killed her son. Not just my son, but her son. And for her to forgive me, I knew Capri. I'd been married to her for several years at that point, known her for a while, but you'd still, she's human just like everybody else. And forgiveness is easy to speak. It's a whole nother thing to put it into practice. And obviously over those years she did. And she never held it over my head. It was never a point of contention. But on the side of that road that day, when everything was coming down on me, that's when the enemy was just attacking me. It was like right there. It's like, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. I barely had time to think. And here it is. Just he's throwing all of this in front of me. That's the father of lies throwing that at me. I can only speak from my perspective, but I think a lot of that, what happened there is what God knew I needed. And his prompting free were for my benefit. Because I needed that. Whether she was conscious of that, I think the Holy Spirit, knew, hey, you need to go over there. You need to be there. And, I think God can do that where he can inspire her to do something for my need or benefit because God knew what I needed. That's only my perspective on it.
Yeah.
Well, it's clear. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say one of the verses that we've exercised obviously throughout our grief journey has been Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him and he'll make your path straight. That's what I was doing at that very moment. I was not leaning on my own understanding, but I was trusting in him to do what he needed to do for our journey together. And I didn't know that, necessarily the picture got bigger, and after the aftermath of just knowing that God is our cornerstone, and he was our firm foundation. And here comes this storm. And we decided that we were just going to trust him to, to keep us safe, because the rains came and the wind blew and boy, our house got shook. And we just know that he is that solid rock. And that's what we just continue to just see him go before us through all things. And I'm not saying we had our moments. We're human. We're human. And, we definitely had our moments and struggles. We definitely struggled. It wasn't.
Sure. I think the day of a lot of what we were experiencing was very supernatural. Yeah. I don't know if, the way I talked to that deputy, I really feel it was a supernatural faith that God gave me. Hey, I have a greater purpose here. And I had faith in that. And I believe that God gave me the supernatural faith I needed that day to understand that, hey, this is going to be, he has a purpose in this. I don't think I humanly had that faith. Obviously I was saved. Yeah. Obviously I professed of my salvation that, Jesus Christ saved me through his blood, but faith in him. And it's really where that rubber meets the road. Okay. Am I going to walk that walk that I talked? Am I going to apply that faith in my life? Is it real? In 1 Peter 1, 6 through 7, it says, in this you will greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith of greater worth than gold, which perishes, even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine, and may result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. So these trials we're going through too is a test of our faith. And I think that's one of those things that it's easy to speak, that we have this faith when everything's going great in life. It's easy to have a faith, but when it's hard, when these trials, these tragedies, these catastrophes or calamities in life approach us, then are we going to walk that walk of faith?
Well, your faith is clear. It stands out, not only in your response, Capri, to follow what the Holy Spirit led. And Arlo, you mentioned that here it's been a week or 2 weeks, and you guys are on this trip and you hear this word of the Lord that you want to help other people. it's clear to me that your faith has definitely led your walk in this journey and kept in and strengthened your marriage. And as you said, I'm sure that there's been times when you guys, have had to work on things, but it's remarkable to me that you responded like you did. As you said, Arlo, it was supernatural. I'm sure that police officer, I'm sure he never forgot that.
No, I agree. I'm sure he didn't.
Yeah. I'm sure that's not a common response to come into a situation like that, which is why they had you on suicide watch.
That is the normal response. That's why he was there. If it didn't happen that way, he would never have been there. You're right. And again, that's where I don't think it was me. I can only give credit to God giving me that faith and blessing me with that faith. And, God knew what I needed and how he was going to use this tragedy. He sees the whole picture, right? He sees where we are today. He saw that before it happened. So he knew this was going to be part of our story. This is going to be part of helping others with that in their tragedy, in their walk. And I can't take credit for it. I don't think there's anything I could do to change that. I know it's not helping others that are walking through that, but I do believe that God truly gave me that supernatural faith to at least understand that there's a purpose in this. This isn't in vain. And the hardest part for us, not to jump too far ahead, is waiting on that purpose. When God gives you a clear revelation of, hey, this is your purpose, then we felt like, Joseph in prison. Okay, I got a purpose. Why am I still here? But by waiting his timing, it was so much better than we could ever do. And we'll get into that a little further. I don't want to jump off, but
well, let's speak to the person who's just heard your story and they are in the beginning of their grief journey of losing a child or a loved one. Any type of grief like that, especially grief of losing a child, is so hard on a marriage. Can you give some advice, words of wisdom to somebody that's listening that's in your shoes?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things, we learned very well doing this work, this ministry has showed me, a lot of people came to me and said, I heard this horrible statistic that 90% of marriages that have lost a child end in divorce. And that is such a lie. It is a bad statistic that came from the 1970s, 77 to be specific. It was a book written by it's called The Bereaved Parent. It was written by Harriet Schiff. And she said 90% of marriages go through struggles or hardship in the immediacy of in months after a loss of a child. But that was basically turned into that it perpetuated this idea that 90% of marriages ended in divorce, which there was never any statistics on that. So what I tell people when they're dealing with that is not a death knell. If anything, it can make your marriage better. And that's what we've experienced. It's actually strengthened our marriage going through this. Like what Capri likes to say is, we fight back to back. We're fighting against the enemy. We are living every parent's worst nightmare. As a bereaved parent, we are living that nightmare. And so we're kind of on this pedestal. People are like, how do they do that? How are they doing that? And so the enemy wants to do everything he can to take away that testimony from us. He wants to destroy our marriages. He wants to destroy our families. And we have to be cognizant of that and realize that Capri's not my enemy. The enemy's out there, and we need to face back to back and fight them. That one of the things too is that we have to realize that we grieve so differently as parents, especially, for us in the immediacy of it. I had to be by myself and I had to spend a lot of quiet time with God. I had to go and just wrestle with God through this. And I was so blessed to be able to do that. Capri gave me that space where I could go and just spend hours and hours and hours in the Word and just with God. And so we could work through that. But I think too is having grace in each other to be able to grieve differently, to understand that they're not going to grieve the same way that you're grieving, and to not have expectations that they do, because those expectations are ultimately going to lead to disappointment. So have grace on your spouse, give them space to be able to grieve. But I think both of us spouses need to be focused on God. And as we focus on God, that'll bring us together even closer in that walk.
Yeah, I think too, when he's talking fighting back to back, we don't want to help the enemy with his agenda, because his agenda is to kill and destroy. And when it comes to marriage, that's something he is going to come after. And, we made a covenant under God. And, we definitely, we said better for worse. And my goodness, having lost a child is the worst thing that we've ever experienced. And I know in my heart that I know he was grieving differently. And again, I know I talked about wanting to be a safe place for my husband. And that's something that I can't say I accurately do all the time, but I can say I tried as hard as I could just to allow him to have that time to himself, because I was grieving the way that I grieved. And we also, communication was a huge part for us, keeping those open lines of communication, just having a lot of grace on each other. And I think that can go for even the single person. Have some grace on yourself. We can be really hard on ourselves, can't we? And I think that's the thing, just remembering that, have grace on yourself, have grace on your spouse. That was a huge one for us.
I was going to say, I think there's nothing wrong with seeking good Christian counseling. If you're at a point where, you need that, there's nothing wrong with that. Just to have somebody help maybe talk through some of the things that you're not able to talk through together. There's lots of wonderful Christian counselors out there that can help facilitate that too, if that's something that you would need. But I really think it comes to just allowing each other to grieve the way that they need to grieve, and not expecting them to grieve the same way that you grieve.
Yeah. And I think also on this point, just husbands and wives, encourage each other to live with holy expectancy that God has a purpose in our pain. And if we continue to trust him, he is going to use it, one way or another, he's going to use that. And that's the one thing I want to encourage husband and wives to do is, just continue to trust him, and not lean on your own understanding. So
that's such great advice. Everything you all said, I'm just soaking it in myself. I'm forgetting that I'm the one supposed to be doing the interview. So I think everything that you guys said was so spot on and such good information for people that are just beginning this journey. Now, so Amos was 18 months and he had two siblings. And how old were they at the time of his death?
He actually had one sibling, and it was Elijah. And Elijah was about 4.5. Or no, I'm sorry, just
he was 4 and 2 months shy of being 5.
Yep.
Share with us then, did Elijah remember Amos?
Yes, and that's because that was just something that we talked about often was Amos, and we had such a different aspect of heaven now that Amos went there, and he being such a little child, he absorbed that, it's so real to him, and that's what the Lord tells us, is that we're supposed to believe like little children. Well, it came natural for him just to believe that, oh, my brother went home to heaven with Jesus, and I'm going to see him again, and so he lived that out as a little one.
Yeah, and he still talks about Amos quite a bit. I mean, he's an adult now. He's 21 years old. But, we've had conversations when he was a teenager or whatever. And he said, I tell my friends about Amos and the story, but they don't want to hear it. It's too hard for them to hear. So I know he still talks about Amos and it comes up in his conversation.
But he's also been able to use that to minister to friends who have lost, siblings. So God's using it. I don't know what the bigger picture looks like, but he continues. And he still, like you said, he still does talk and he remembers him. But once Amos ran ahead, 9 months later, I got pregnant with our third child, Ezekiel. And, that was something, because I get sick pretty early on in my pregnancy. And I was sick for about 5 months. So I'm grieving, very sick, trying to take care of our little boy, trying to,
give me space to work through what I had to work.
And thank God we had a wonderful, loving family. They all just came around and supported us. But when Ezekiel turned 10 months old, I got pregnant with our daughter, Tallulah. So we've got this 10-month-old. I'm pregnant again, sick 5 more months. And, it just kind of went boom, boom, boom. And I just held on. Lord. I wasn't leaning on my own understanding. I just knew that God, he could see the bigger picture, and we were just trusting him in that. And it was hard. Oh my goodness, it was hard trying to juggle that,
But they've come, we've talked so much about Amos. It's like they know who Amos is and they talk about Amos and they're looking forward to meeting Amos. So it's something that, we have definitely tried to keep Amos relevant to them. Like, hey, he's your brother. Just let them have that experience, but also it's not something hidden away.
And we included them in what we call them is heaven days. And then we have birthdays that we would, celebrate for Amos. So they've gotten to be a part of that. And it just makes him very real, to them to be able to participate like that. And of course, that has changed over the years as well. How we celebrate those days, those anniversaries, and we, this past one, because they're so much older, we went to Puerto Rico. We took all the kids and, went and did something like that with them, just to get away. But
that's awesome. And, one thing I don't know if you guys have considered this, but what your 21-year-old has witnessed is parents that have gone through some tough times and they love Jesus and they love each other. And as parents, we all know that kids learn way more from what they witness and see than what they're told. So the impact that you are going to have in his life and even your younger children, as you've said, you've made that very much a part of your everyday life. So the example that you have set for them is just really unspeakable, to let them see mom and dad struggle, but yet surrender. It's an amazing story, guys. Let's pick up, Arlo, when you were talking about, so your experience, so God laid this on your heart, what was that, a week after he went to heaven?
It was a week. We had the memorial service a week later. About a week and a half, if that. Yeah, it wasn't very long.
So that was in 2006, is my recollection right?
Correct.
Okay, and so then you go to your first While We're Waiting in 2019?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, tell us about that.
Sure. It was one of those things that we went not to be a part of While We're Waiting. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We just, how do you do this?
We wanted to see the blueprint.
Yeah. What do you do at a retreat? How does this work? How does this function? Just to get an idea of what kind of facilities we need, what kind of fundraising we need to do, what are going to be the costs to do this, just all that kind of stuff. So While We're Waiting was the model we wanted to follow, as far as no cost. These retreats are totally free of charge. So just a place where people would come no matter what and have a safe place to share. And so when we got the notice from Jill, hey, we have an opening this week, and there was it didn't take but a half a second to say we're there. It was just part of that affirmation from God that it wasn't a coincidence that a last minute opening happened on Amos's birthday. We took that as part of that affirmation from God. And when we got out there, we met the Zacharys, just wonderful people, and we fell in love with the ministry and how just beautiful and how simple it was. And really, Saturday, Capri and I, in our free time, we went for a drive into this beautiful painted desert. It was gorgeous, and that's where I felt God speaking to my heart and saying, you know what? I don't want you to do something on your own. I want you to be a part of this. And so, we had talked to Zachary's a little bit about it, and we come back to Maryland, and I was communicating with Jill. It's like, we'd love to sign up to do retreats and everything. And she's like, whoa, hold on, let's pump the brakes here. We don't know you. She said, why don't you fill out the application to do our support groups? And support group was never even on our radar. That wasn't even something we even talked about or thought about doing. But we went ahead and signed up for those to do support groups. And they asked us to come down alumni for us and meet us. And it was just another God ordained weekend. There were so many things that God's hand was in that weekend. It was just clear to us. And I believe to the Browns and the Sullivans that God's hand was in this. Mm-hmm. And we left that weekend with them saying, hey, go find a place in Maryland. We'll take care of it. And Capri and I are big fans of the George Mueller approach, which I don't know if you've ever heard of George Mueller, but basically he built everything by faith. With it, if God's in it, he'll provide everything for it. And While We're Waiting has done that. Mm-hmm. We just up and do it. As you know, it's just amazing what Jill does as far as just all the emails and the logistics and all the hard work she does. It wasn't even on my radar screen when we were thinking of doing it on our own.
Right.
And we're so blessed to have just Jill do what she does, because she's just amazing. But then we come back and we're now doing these retreats 4 or 5 times a year, and it is just such a blessing. It's just so awesome. I was sharing with Brad last time I saw him, or maybe the time before. It was, so many people are in ministry. They plant seeds, and they never know or see the fruit of those plantings. But we are so privileged to see God working in hours on people's hearts and changing people's lives in just a couple of days. And it's just so awesome to be a part of that, and to see how God can use our circumstances and situations to help point to the hope that we have in Him. Point to the hope that it's not going to be in vain, that there is a greater purpose in this, and that He loves you. And He's going to carry you through it. But it's just such a privilege to be in a ministry that you can see God working so quickly in people's lives. And it's just, we just feel so blessed to even just, and certainly not worthy to be doing this, but it is just such a privilege.
Well, you certainly had the vision, because you had to wait from 2006 to 2000. And I'm not sure when you actually started it there in Maryland.
We did our first one in 2019.
Oh, 2019. Wow. Yeah, that was pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. When it was just like Joseph, get to work. The door's going to fly open. We got to work.
Well, I want to share with the folks. So if you've lost a child, the ministry that we're talking about is While We're Waiting, and you can go to the website whilewe'rewaiting.org. And if you want to attend, there's locations now, since, Arlo and Capri, there's many locations that you can pick where you would like to go to a retreat. They do fill up quickly. However, you want to always get on a cancellation list, because that's what happened to Tony and I. The very first time we attended we got canceled during COVID. So we had to wait to the following June, but we were on a cancellation list and somebody canceled last minute. So we were able to go. So visit that website. You can find something near you, or the main location is in Arkansas, and you can sign up for there as well. Now, who facilitates with you guys there in Maryland?
We actually facilitate sort of by ourselves. We have what we call like a permanent alumni couple, kind of like the Zacharys. So we have just our awesome behind the scenes team of Michael and Aaron Patrick, and they just are just great servers and just help. But as far as co-facilitators, we've never had co-facilitators. So we've facilitated our retreats kind of like the Zacharys, but we couldn't do it without Mike and Aaron too. They're just a huge asset for us, and just help so much behind the scenes for us.
I want to give you guys the last word as we get ready to close. What do you want to leave with the folks today?
I guess the thing I would like to say is that by fully leaning in and fully trusting on God, He will carry us through that struggle. And one of the things I talk about a lot is, we've probably all seen that poster, Footsteps in the Sand. My grandmother had it on there. It's basically a story of a guy looking back across his life as him walking down the beach. There's 2 sets of footprints where God's walking beside him. And he questions God, why is there only 1 set of footprints? Why did you leave me in my darkest, worst time of my life? And God says, that's my footprints. I'm carrying you. If you allow the God to carry you through these tragedies, you'll be the closest you've ever been to Him. And you can lean fully on Him and let Him carry you through. And if you're struggling with those issues of anger or He can take it. God's big enough. He can take those things. I just tell you, take it straight to God and wrestle through with them. But I encourage you to stay in your word, to seek other support groups around you. Christian support group, While We're Waiting, does offer virtual, and if there's nothing around you, but we do have support groups all over the country. And for Capri and I, we said earlier that it was never even on our radar as something to do. We're so grateful that we do it. It's like our family gets together once a month in our house, and we're able to share with other parents in a safe place to get it. And it is just amazing. We've been doing it for 4 years now, and just to see the growth in couples that have been attending, single people, just seeing God working through their lives over these years is just so encouraging. But it's also encouraging as a new face comes into the group to watch the group come in and love on them and help them. So I would encourage you to get a support group of believers around you that can help to just support you in that.
Yeah, I agree. And stay the course, because God knows the plan. Just keep trusting him in it. And we know it's hard, but he will be there. He loves you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your story. It's tragic, but yet beautiful. And you encourage me. And my prayer is that everyone who hears your story will be encouraged too. And that's all I have for you today, guys. So until next time, take care.
Thank you so much, Teresa.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys. Did today's episode touch your heart like it did mine? If you know someone who could benefit from hearing this story, would you share the episode with them today? And thank you for spending time with me on the Grief Mentor podcast. I look forward to next time. Bye-bye for now.